But just, I said, only mine.
You're live.
No.
All right.
Maybe you know.
Am I on? All right, it's 6:30 p.m. On Wednesday, the 29th, and I'm opening up the select board meeting. Would you all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I will back up on my script a little bit. This meeting's being recorded. 4 out of the 5 select board members are present. There's currently no select board member online remotely, but if they do attend, we will let you know. Is there anyone online? All right, and Brendan Chanel just joined us remotely. Hey, Brendan. All right, so is there anybody in person or online who would like to address the board about something that is not on tonight's agenda?
Carl can't hear anything.
Oh, Carl can't hear anything? Well, I see the microphone moving. Yeah, yeah.
Brendan broke that he could hear.
Brendan can hear?
Yeah.
All right. Dennis, you have your hand raised. What can I do for you?
You're muted, Dennis.
You're mute, Dennis. All right. All right. So before we get to the budget presentation, we have one little item of official business to take care of, which is the annual town election warrant. And this is so that we can put the official stamp on these words I'm about to read here in just a second, so that the clerk can then officially get going with the election. So the Town of Mendon annual election warrant, Commonwealth of Massachusetts and Worcester, to the constables, officers, or town clerk of the Town of Mendon and the County of Worcester, greetings. In the name of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you are hereby directed to notify and warn the inhabitants of said town qualified to vote in elections and in town affairs to meet at the Misco Middle School in said Mendon on the 19th of May, next to act on the following article. Article 1, offices to be filled at the annual town election to be held on May 19th, 2026. Moderator for 1 year. Select Board for 3 years. Board of Assessors for 3 years. Board of Health for 3 years. Mendon-Upton Regional School District Committee member for 3 years. Park Commissioner for 3 years. Planning Board for 5 years. Taft Public Library Trustee for 3 years. And Water Commissioner for 3 years. Question 1. Shall the Town of Mendon be allowed to assess an additional $1.1 million in real estate and personal property taxes for the purpose of funding the Mendon-Upton Regional School District operational budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2026. The polls will open at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. And you are directed to serve this warrant by posting it up in attached copies, et cetera, et cetera. So do the members of the board? Yes.
I thought that voting was till 8 p.m. usually.
What did I say? 7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
That's what it says. Yeah.
You said 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Or did
All right.
did I hallucinate?
7 a.m. to 7 or 8 p.m. Sorry, now you're making me say it again. So I apologize if I misspoke there. So we voted on this language on question 1 already. The other ones are the officials up for election this year. And so I would just be looking for a motion to approve this warrant.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor, this will be a roll call vote because Brendan's online. So Cooter, aye.
Those aye.
We're all, yeah.
Chanel, aye.
Thanks. All right, motion passes. So the fiscal 2027 budget. So that's what we're here to talk about. This is an off-cycle select board meeting. And so, we just talked, I guess we'll start here. We just talked about the election warrant. And so what you heard was that there is a question on the warrant to approve the $1.1 million. That is the override. And so I think I heard a question earlier today that I'll address right now, which is why isn't the word override on the town warrant? And that's because the warrant and the election articles are separate, and that the override is not in the warrant. The override is something that the town members of town meeting authorize us to act on, correct?
Yeah, town meeting approves a budget, approves an appropriation, subject to a ballot measure to approve an override to fund it. So town meeting doesn't get to approve that override. They say, here's a budget, and we are going to implement that budget should we get the override. So I have very specific language on that, and we'll get there later in the presentation.
Yeah, so that's kind of the summary. And when we get to town meeting, you can think about it as these two separate votes, one for the budget overall, plus the other articles that are on the town meeting warrant. And then one separattle the next week during election time. And that's the authorization portion. And so now the town administrator is going to sort of present the more condensed, summarized version of the things that we've been presenting for the last couple of months here. And then if there are any questions online or in the audience, we'll take those and get them answered best we can with all the people we have in this room.
All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, so for everyone listening, folks who don't know me, my name's Jeremy. I'm the town administrator, and I'm going to be going through a couple of things tonight. So just a big picture, where do we sit as a state, what our process locally was to create our budget, what's driving the budget, and what our funding approach is, and then we'll take some questions. And we have representatives from Mendon Upton Regional Schools here as well. So statewide financial environment, stuff that happens elsewhere, we're not immune to. Here on the left, this is a slide that I presented to Finance Committee and Select Board earlier. The MMA, the Massachusetts Municipal Association, put out 2 reports about the fiscal pressures that cities and towns face. And what you see on the right here is from the Marblehead Current, and it is both a number and value, a count and a value of overrides since 2017, fiscal 2017. So you can see that there are operational overrides happening across the state, increasing even at an increasing rate for a few of those years. So this is not a Mendon specific thing. Font's kind of small for people here in the audience, but from the Perfect Storm report, what they talk about are rising costs and sluggish state aid is putting pressure on budgets. We don't have the ability to raise revenue locally. We don't have a lot of levers we can pull. And then different types of municipalities, rural, city, suburban, have faced different fortunes through the state aid process. This chart on the right says about Massachusetts municipalities have been frugal. So annual change in total operating spending from 2010 through 2022. The low bar on the left is Massachusetts cities and towns at 0.6% increase as an average annual change. US cities and towns are at 1%, and the state of Massachusetts is at 2.8%. So in terms of where we sit with our peers, Massachusetts municipalities writ large have controlled spending over the last decade. And revenues haven't kept up. So on the left, we see education aid inconsistent. Gateway cities and urban areas have fared, I don't want to say well, but fared better than the average base and the suburban. Whereas you see rural, the yellow line on the bottom, has faced the bleakest of Chapter 70, which is the state education aid program, the bleakest situation. And Mendon is considered in that rural band. And the chart on the right is unrestricted general government aid. So the blunt and ugly sounding acronym UGA. And it's benchmarked to fiscal 2007. And then Inflation adjusted, you can see the gap. So the gray bar is what inflation adjusted unrestricted general government aid should have been, quote unquote, and blue is what it is. So the Massachusetts Municipal Association is advocating for that uptick, that green bar at the end. That didn't happen in the governor's or House budget. So we expect to receive just over $500,000 in UGA for fiscal 27. So it's not a line item that makes or breaks our budget, but if that gap was closed, we would be in a different situation here. So how did we get here? How did we get from ideas to the documents that we have here? So it starts in December. It's always a little funny to me that we're not even halfway through one fiscal year and I'm talking about budgeting for the next fiscal year. But I send out a memo to department heads, have a department head meeting, and I say some version of this every year, but by definition, our budgets exist on a knife edge and balancing it is a constant struggle, but we're committed to maintaining services and doing it effectively and transparently. So it's, if we turned a big profit every year, that's money left unspent, not necessarily invested in the people and the services that we could provide. So we're always going to be touch and go. So then late January into February, I meet with department heads. I don't cut things from department head budgets. I try to understand what their requests are. Every request that a department has comes to the select board. And then late February, joint finance committee and select board budget meetings. And then there was also MURSD multi-board meeting with the counterparts. So we partner with the leaders in the school district throughout this whole process. Where are you at? Where are we at? What can we expect? And then it's at the end, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but the select board is under an obligation to present the school committee certified budget to voters for approval, which is what this budget accomplishes. And then there were 2 April joint meetings to finalize the budget, where we went through and said, I kept using the phrase shirts to couch cushions, or give everybody a haircut, go through and cut $100,000+ from the budget, said no to requests. The schools did the same thing. They came back with a budget that was certified at $200,000 range, lower than the initial certification. So we went back to the table and said, how can we minimize the increased request? So where does that leave us? A lot of numbers on the left, but this is our snapshot that shows we're balanced right now. The number we're going to be talking about is this 27.7 million. That's the total budget that includes everything. And then those numbers below it are raised on the levy, but are not part of the general fund budget. So we need to come up with those numbers for the Board of Assessors accounts each year, but they're not part of the general fund budget. The 2 pieces we'll be diving into tonight are the stabilization appropriation, the $564,000, and the Proposition 2.5 override, the $110,000. And 1.1 million, yeah, wildly different. Sorry. And the chart on the right just shows, we're heavily dependent on property tax. So local receipts, which is things like motor vehicle excise, meals excise, cannabis local option sales tax, all sorts of municipal or miscellaneous costs, fees, permits, that sort of thing. That's just 10% of our budget. And state aid, you can see here, is that 2.3%. So even if the state aid kind of explodes, we're not going to see a lot of that. The reason ours would look different than a place like Uxbridge or Hopedale even is that Chapter 70 aid comes through on what's called the cherry sheet, which is state aid. We don't see any meaningful Chapter 70 aid. It goes directly to the school district. So if you're trying to look at us versus a municipality that has a municipal school district, our state aid makeup as a portion of our budget is going to be wildly different. So 27.7 million in a vacuum doesn't really mean much. So what does it mean? It's a $3.2 million increase over fiscal 26. And I just want to show the drivers that we're talking about later through the school district represent most of that, and that the municipal side increase is 5.1% over fiscal 26. And almost 10% of the increase in fiscal 27 is driven by excluded debt service that the voters approved last year. So let's talk about budget drivers. of that 27 million, you're going to see a very small number here because so much of what we do is fixed costs and known before we start, and we don't have many levers to pull on most of them. So from the municipal side, some key additions, 2 new firefighters. It's part of a multi-year plan to get to 3 career firefighters per shift. We've gone to a 42-hour work week from a 48-hour work week, which with the addition of a firefighter last year, which was big for staff morale, work-life balance, retention, and job satisfaction, which is important to us. So once they're fully loaded with the stipends and the equipment and everything else, insurance, it costs about $217,000 for 2 new firefighters. Also in fire, right now, the fire executive assistant splits duties at police and physically sits at police, which is also not ideal for fire operations. So what this does is it cuts those hours of the executive assistant, but moves them to the fire headquarters and then backfills that position with an administrative assistant at police headquarters. So the net increase is about $75,000 once you factor in taking insurance as well. And then adds a 32-hour week assistant town administrator. And this is about $82,000 when netted with other reductions. So we saw 16 hours per week reductions in the select board and human resources budget as a result, as a trade-off. And then some lower rates at one of those positions as well. So it's not just a total add, it's pay for with some other changes in the budget. And this, to me, to the board, to a lot of people, is an important senior management position in town. We're very, very flat. I can talk all evening about this one, but we'll move on. And then some future planning. So we're in a regional emergent 911 dispatch group, which has been an unmitigated financial success for the town. It has saved us quite a bit of money over the years since we have joined. Part of the reason for that savings is that our membership through fiscal 2028 is capped by our state 911 grant. And in fiscal 2029, we're going to feel the full weight of that assessment. Our assessment now is about $130,000. And if it wasn't capped, it would be about $220,000. So we know that's coming in fiscal 29. So we're building in this $30,000 to spend on capital this year. And we're going to put in another $30,000 to $40,000 in fiscal 28, spend that on capital again. And then in fiscal 29, put in another $30,000 or $40,000, and that, $110,000 or so it will be available to pay for this increase, and it won't just be $110,000 hitting us square in the face, not planned for. So some cost savings, we refined budgets. We took the finance committee reserve, which had been increasing over the past couple of years. Things like building maintenance, which we put a lot of money into this year. We pumped the brakes a little bit on that. Refined how we budget for insurance. Norfolk Aggie, the agricultural school that we pay tuition to, really refined what those assumptions were. And then we're able to scale back our legal costs a little bit now that we're not in a contract negotiation. So on the Mendon Upton side, Mendon Upton regional side, I'm going to post these on the town meeting supporting docs, and I'm going to post it on my page. I'll post it on our Facebook. So this is a link to the Mendon Upton budget page. There's a ton of information there. Superintendent and director of finance have been on the road for the last couple of months giving presentations to everybody who will listen. This is
Even some people who won't listen.
I thought about making that joke, and then so this is going to be really high level, and then the school, like I said, the school folks are here tonight to dive into that a little bit more. So first, I want to start just on the Mendon side. So it's a $2.3 million increase, and like I said, 300 and some thousand of that is through the debt exclusion. But it's a 21% increase. But to remember, fiscal 26 was a $0 increase over fiscal 25. So what I just talked about with the regional dispatch and including that spacer, the select board did last year with Mendon Upton's assessment. We knew it was going to be bigger this year, and we didn't have $2.3 million to stick there, but we had $50,000 and tried to plan for that. So if you look at the compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, since fiscal 24, we're up 8.1%. But since fiscal 26, it's compound annual growth rate of 1.6%. So 21% increase in 1 year is staggering and difficult to swallow on its face, but put in context of school district asks over the last decade, it becomes a more nuanced picture where it would have been easier budgetarily to see small increases over a decade rather than one at the end. But from where we sit now, that's where we're at. And it ends up being ultimately cheaper over that decade to just do it at the end rather than across it. But it is a rip the Band-Aid sort of moment. So when I talk about the next pieces, these are district-wide. So these numbers are shared between the regional agreement between Mendon and Upton and not quite in a 50-50 split. So these are the drivers of the Mendon Upton budget. Health insurance, $1.7 million increase, which is a 32% increase in health insurance. So we're talking about premium increases. Their premiums were lower than ours to begin with. So even a large premium increase is still lower than what the town's paying. But it was also driven by increased participation and the claim history. And those first two things you don't really have control over. Here on the town side, we don't have as much exposure for the increased participation piece. Kind of we're pretty steady state in terms of who participates in our insurance program. The school district's a heck of a lot bigger than we are. So when you get 5 or 6 people who jump on expensive plans mid-year that you're not expecting, that adds up quick. Salaries in generally $1.5 million, which is a 6% increase. That's contractual COLA, steps and lanes, and it's all part of being providing attractive salary package. But 6% is not the 32% that we're seeing in insurance. And special education, this is out of district placements. This is not teachers in district. These are for complicated situations medically or educationally or otherwise, social emotionally, that require expertise outside the district. These rates are generally set by the state and by outside entities, and the district doesn't really have control over them. So to have a 25% increase in 1 year is difficult to stomach. The town couldn't come up with $1 million out of nowhere like that either, especially 3 times over. And these 3 drivers, just these 3 things, represent 81% of the total increase. So how do we fund it? Those are all big numbers. So we're looking to stabilize operations, stabilize the tax rate. How do we get there? So the final deficit when we shoved everything into the middle was about $1.2 million. Like I said, that's after cuts and additions on both the school and the municipal side. We both did both things. So our options, we could put the full deficit on the override, a $1.6 million override. And that would be an average annual single family home value impact of $684, which board finance committee through deliberation says that number's too big. We could cut a $1.6 million out. But like I said, we're under an obligation to put the school committee certified budget up for voters. So that would be $1.6 million in municipal cuts if everything else stayed the same, which is would be difficult to stomach operationally and would involve laying off a large number of people to the point where I didn't do the math. I don't know what $1.6 million in cuts would look like because it was just kind of untenable operationally. So then a hybrid approach of reserves plus an override. So balancing taxpayer impact with new investments. But this is by its definition using reserves, using one time for recurring expenditures. So we need to sufficiently plan to maintain solvency in out years, which is what we're getting to. So before we get into how we're going to pay for it, I just want to give a little bit of a picture of where we're at. So free cash, which is the difference in our revenues and expenditures in any given fiscal year, plus whatever free cash we didn't spend the year prior. So in October 2025, our free cash, so from fiscal 25 for use in 2026, was certified at $2.2 million. We spent about $1.2 million of that, and there's about $900,000 in free cash right now. There is an article on the warrant to fund the snow and ice removal deficit with free cash. It was a snowy winter, and we spent a lot of money doing that, of about $220,000. So free cash will be down around the 690 something range. Snow and ice is always really frustrating to me. We spend $300,000 or $400,000, and we don't have any. There's not a bridge. There's not a person. There's not a program. There's just it melts and it goes away, and we spend $300,000 and something to do it. That's New England, I guess. Capital stabilization, there's an article on the warrant to use this to pay for Providence Street culvert replacement, to minimize the amount needed to be borrowed and possibly and attempt to keep any debt away from a debt exclusion. So keep everything within the levy and not require a marginal tax increase for the Providence Street culvert replacement. And then on the right is stabilization fund. So you can see the healthy growth in this fund. This is the, I started in July of 24, and the town has twice appropriated $300,000 into stabilization. So the growth just in the last couple of years has been impressive based upon available free cash balances. So the current balance in stabilization is just over $2 million. And these are in short-term investment, high yield savings, CD sorts of things. So we're getting a rate of return. It's not sitting in a nothing checking account, but it's not like we haven't invested in NVIDIA or something.
They'd be doing pretty well.
Yeah. So funding approach. So like I said, we've got a couple of motions attached to Article 4 on the warrant, which is just the budget article. So the total general fund budget, it's the arrow I pointed to earlier, that 27.7 million. Motion A will be a town general fund budget of nearly 0.1 million. So that funds all municipal services, including all the additions I said earlier. And it includes an MURSD appropriation of almost 7 million, which is a $645,000 or 5.8% increase from the fiscal 26 appropriation or assessment. Motion B would be a revised general fund budget of 26.6 million and will require a 2/3 vote to use stabilization to increase the MURSD line by $564,402.62. We're working in odd numbers here. So we either had to make the stabilization number odd, the override number odd, or both. And we thought it was clearer to have a clean number on the override ballot question and put the pennies and odd dollars here. And then motion C would be a contingent general fund budget of 27.759, that number with the arrow from earlier. And that requires a simple majority, and the vote would be contingent on a $1.1 million override passing on the ballot. So this is the same slide I presented a few weeks ago. There's no annual town meeting article on the warrant. There's no article about the override. They just pass a vote or pass a budget. Sorry, I'm reading vote. They vote to pass a budget that requires an override. So that's the mechanism here. I've gotten some feedback that that's not entirely clear on the warrant. So should we be in this position again in a number of years, maybe we will take that feedback into account and maybe present it a little bit differently. But to be clear, Article 4 is the budget, and the budget in this 3-step process requires a $1.1 million override to fund it in its entirety. Another link here, Finance Committee voted on Monday to support all 3 motions. So they are recommending positively to town meeting all 3 of these motions. And Finance Committee was involved in every step of this process the same way that Select Board was. There was not a Select Board meeting about the budget that didn't include the Finance Committee.
Brendan, do you have a question?
Yeah, Jeremy, I just wanted to state for the record that this strategy and this language went through town council as well. So the feedback on how to do this in the most expedient and sound way came from town council.
Thank you, Brendan. I actually had presented a warrant to Select Board that included a separate article on the override, and town council said that was superfluous, recommended deleting it and going the motion route. So yeah, thank you. That's an important piece.
Go ahead, Mr. Bragg.
What order will you be taking those 3 motions? A to C or C to A?
A to C.
A to C. So if, let's say, A passes, B doesn't, is there an option for C to be A and C but no B?
Yes. We cannot amend, cannot amend the number in C, the override number, with the ballots already printed for the $1.1 million. So there's no amendment there. But should A and C pass, B, none of them are contingent on B passing. Where we go from there, there's a big waterfall about recertification from school committee. How much money do we have available? Do we need another town meeting? But yes,
B not passing is just gonna change
Right.
tax rates.
And if A, B, and C all pass, we get all three of those months.
yeah, 75
You need
million.
to lay down.
That's the plan, right? After this year.
Too many presentations next year.
All right. So I want to talk about, there's a lot of numbers. I have some highlights on here that I'll talk about. So this walks through what a hybrid approach means, how to use stabilization and an override. How do we use one-time funds for recurring expenditures? And how do we make sure stabilization isn't just pilfered over the next 4 to 5 years? So this green number up here, this is total new revenue. So this is Proposition 2.5 annual growth. So that's our current levy plus 2.5%, 2.5% on the override amount, a new growth estimate, which are really conservative throughout here, and a local receipt growth estimate, which is 5% annual rounded to make an even number. And then we say, all right, this stabilization use, this $564,000 in fiscal 27, what pays for that $560,000 in fiscal 28? That money's one-time money. So this is a ramp down approach. So we say we continue to use stabilization. So you can see the stabilization balance on the bottom continues to go down. So we continue to use stabilization 28, but not to the same level. So it creates a $214,000 hole that we need to come up with, that we need to be able to fill. And we're using that new revenue, that number in the green box up there, to fill it. So from that 800, that green box, and we subtract the 200 to fill the gap, we've got $600,000 to spend. And if we assume a 2% increase across the board for schools as well, we end up with a leftover, a surplus of $140,000 there at the bottom. That's to invest in new things. That's to pay for stuff outside of a 2% increase. And that's in year one. We continue to ramp down our use and stabilization and create a bigger gap. And then, of course, the 2% increases in expenses continue to get bigger, and the remaining new revenue gets bigger. We can see we're at that knife's edge that I talked about before. So when we look out 6 years into this projection into fiscal 33, we're at 1.5%, 1.5% deficit, or almost $500,000. So these are all really conservative figures on top. And this is a not set in stone timeline. This is a nearly set in stone approach, but not a set in stone timeline. So we have some levers we can use to correct those deficits. One, just more economic growth and local receipts and new growth. Like, that's kind of out of our hands, but it would help. We can use free cash instead of stabilization, as we have now. I said there's about $700,000 left here. That would create the same sort of gap, but it would maintain the stabilization balance greater, or to a greater degree. And then we could smooth out the ramp down into more fiscal years to make that gap smaller. Or we can, the stabilization repayments. I have in 3 years to get back up. Those can be, again, supplemented with free cash rather than existing revenues here, recurring revenues here, or the timeline can be stretched out even further. All of this is predicated on expense management throughout. There's not another override in these next 6 years on this. That's not part of the analysis. And this blue box here is where I talk about stop using stabilization, we start repaying. So we have the full gap from stabilization, and then these repayments, which can be stretched out a little bit. So people in my position say a lot, one-time revenues for one-time expenditures and recurring revenues for recurring expenditures. What this is trying to highlight here is that our one-time use now of stabilization, which I'm fond of saying is to both stabilize operations and stabilize impacts to the taxpayer. This one-time use, we can make that up and we can supplant that one-time use with recurring revenues while still having manageable surplus and deficits in the out years. We talked about this at length with Finance Committee, with Select Board. Finance Committee endorsed this approach as responsible to the taxpayer, while also being thoughtful from a financial management perspective. And they were a little reluctant to consider on the outset, because what I just said. And then once we explained it, the entire committee unanimously supported motion C or motion B, the use of stabilization. So that's where we're at. The taxpayer impact of a $1.1 million override. Like I said, the average single family home assessed value in town is $664,496. So that number is $452. I have the $100,000 assessed value up here at $68. So most people have a sense of what their house is assessed at. So take the $100,000 and kind of get there and figure out what that multiple is and multiply that by 68. Someone made the comment earlier, your assessed value is not the value that Zillow says is its estimate. Those are different numbers. So you can get your figure from the assessor. And then this tool on the right is, this is the basis from the taxpayer impact. So the Division of Local Services has a tool. You put in the amount, the override amount, and it tells you all of these metrics. So you can go in there and play around with it too. You can say, well, what if all 1.6 million was on an override? Or what if we did what Upton did and didn't fit so much in the levy and we did a $2 million override? What would that be tax impact wise? And you can see this is the way that gets us below $500 for the average impact. And that's also linked here. So that's what I got. Links here too is mendonma.gov, which is a site put together by the select board that has all these facts and figures, has a million FAQs, does the TikTok of the process, gives the what happens, a yes or no override vote. A lot of great information there. So I thank Chair Cooter for all the time spent to get it up and running. Yeah, and happy to take any questions. Turn it back over to the chair.
Little me. Yes, Mr. Byer.
One question, it's just curiosity, when the table you had the previous slide with 2.5 increase, does that take into account potential successful override in this year? For 28, meaning did you add in the 1.1 million potentially if that, I mean, I know that would be, this would be more conservative, it's not added, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, yes, I took the $27.7 million base budget and
Okay.
2% on that.
I thought maybe
And-
that's an extra money.
And
Just to cover things.
And it's a 3-year budget forecast is really useful. Once you get beyond that, it's kind of too many assumptions. So this also doesn't control for some of the money that could be found is that there's 2% growth on excluded debt. And as that excluded debt falls off, we're not going to see a 2% growth associated with it, but that revenue also goes away in part. So I just didn't control for it. I just said it comes out in the wash.
I get it.
Is there anybody online or in the audience here that wants to speak? Yes, sir.
Alan Colby, 81 Park Street. Can you just clarify for me what is the proposed town increase in the tax or property tax?
I mean, like the separation of what the town is charging versus the school.
Second question would be is what's the impact of the school request?
So the town services are all funded in that base budget, in that motion A. So without the use of stabilization and without the use of an override, it fully funds municipal services and it funds a 5.8% increase for the schools. So none of the municipal services are included in the stabilization or the override.
But that's a 2.5 because we get the 2.5 increase every year, right? So it's a 2.5% increase the town executes every year on your taxes. And then
Okay, so
this is over that.
Assessment taxes now is $13.29 per assessed thousand.
Right.
Okay, so how much can I expect it to increase? It's going to go up 2.5% for the town, and how much for the school?
0.68.
Say again over.
0.68.
0.16.
No,
68 cents.
68 cents. 68 cents
68 cents.
per $1,000 in assessed value.
Town wants how much for?
None.
None?
The same tax rate that you're
Just-
paying right now.
Just the 2.5% increase.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe think of a new graphic we need to write. Is there anybody online? Board, yeah, sorry, board, I forgot all about you. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I just wanted to, I think Jeremy touched on it a few times, but I think the budget timeline that you saw was sort of a fiscal year. But I would want to emphasize that the investments being made, these aren't things that we just thought of this past fall to put into this budget. These are the results of decisions made over the past 2 to 3 cycles, looking for a time when we can make these investments. So this is really multi-year planning. We've demonstrated for the first time. I've been on the select board quite a while, and we've been doing this. But not only past years to identify that when the investments can be made, but future years. So we have ideas to a thing where we want to invest in, 2, 3 years out. And this allows us to plan accordingly and smooth the impact to the residents, both in terms of tax impact and when we can bring services on. So I just want to make sure this is really a multi-year view, although I kept hearing about April, March, February. A lot of this is the result of the past 2 cycles leading up to this and looking out the next 3 to 6 cycles.
Yeah, it's a good point. We don't usually do the budget in a vacuum. It's usually part of a larger plan. Mr. Krager.
Yeah, thanks. So Mike Krager, 16 Colonial Drive. Also chair of the Finance Committee, for those who aren't aware. To the question that was asked about the distribution of the tax increase between the school and the town, I want to remind the room that the school is part of the town. It is the town's obligation to educate our children and to be able to fund the school budget. I also want to remind folks that operationally, the town could have chosen to fund the school at its complete total ask and figured out an override in order to support the rest of the town operating model. So the town versus school argument it's not an argument, it's one and the same. This is an approach that needs to be taken in order to make sure that all the needs of the town, which include every single department that is, under the purview of the town, including the school, making sure they all get funded. So yes, there are ways we can cut numbers. I'm very happy to cut numbers in a different way that make grabs and Excel spreadsheets look different to whatever desire we're trying to go after. This is all one thing, and we're trying to take the best approach to make everybody happy and limit the impact to the residents across the board.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think Jeremy had pointed out that in a few different ways. One was, by saying that we're required to present the school budget as they present it to us. That's an important point there, that when it gets delivered to us, we don't get to change that budget. We can just make adjustments around it. And the other point of that we pass that money through to the schools. So it's our responsibility to ensure that, we're doing so in a way that doesn't retract any of the services that we also use to essentially help support the schools. So it's all tied together, right, Jeremy? A butterfly.
Yeah, and I did not put fine enough a point on that. So when I said the 68 cents per assessed value is on this for the school department budget, that's the way the ballot question and the motion will be crafted. And that's just the mechanics of town meeting, tying both a school and municipal into one override would imperil both budgets for July 1. And you're right, it's all the same money, like I said earlier, pushed into the middle of the table, and we're kind of all on the same team. And from a process point of view, isolating that budgetary risk to kind of one budget made more sense as we talked about it from the select board's perspective.
Elena, and then I'll get to Mr. Moderator in a second.
So, yeah, I was actually wanting to make a similar point to Mike Krager. So thank you, Mike, for bringing that up, because I think this, right, it's about, as you said, it's about the mechanics, but this is, it is important for our whole community to consider both budgets together. And we did discuss the possibility of doing a smaller override for some of the municipal services, the increases, but they were relatively small. And so it would be very complicated to figure out how to, say, for example, put just 2 firefighters or just 1 firefighter, because maybe we could fit 1 firefighter in and not a second one. So to separate it, it's right, it's the mechanics of the warrant articles and of the ballot that are about how the money is distributed, but the process is, it's all of our budget as a whole.
And that process is something that we are told to do, not something that we make up. So
Right,
the Mass General Law
guidance.
dictates how we can put town meeting together and how we can
Right.
vote on this.
I mean, but it would have been possible to put an addition, like it would have been possible to put several override questions, similar to how we did with the debt exclusions, that was split into 3. We could have split this up, but it was, we were advised not to do that because it would
Make it more
overcomplicate
Yeah, it
things.
muddies the communication for sure.
Yes.
Mr. Moderator,
I have some questions, just kind of about the mechanics of the motions ahead of town meeting, so we're not figuring things out on the floor.
sure.
Also, Tom Morale, 52 Millville Road or Street, depending on who you ask. But so typically when we do the motions for the budget, we kind of have a line item budget. We like to give people the chance to hold and ask questions about the different line items on the budget. The way these motions are structured, we're essentially presenting 3 different budgets.
So I had this conversation with former moderator yesterday morning. So the motion A, the first motion on the base budget, the 26 million will be exactly as everybody has been accustomed to the budget being read. Mr. Krager will read the department level items, and we'll go through, and they'll be up on the screen behind him, and we'll vote that. That will be absolutely the same. And then the next one will say the same thing we just voted, plus $564,402.02 increase to Department 301 for a total of whatever.
Okay.
And then motion C will say everything we just talked about, plus $1.1 million to Department 301 for a total of 13.32.
Contingent, and that's
A
that would be
mechanical cascade so that we don't lose what comes before it.
gotcha.
So motion A, it was
Typical line item,
hyper simplified here.
and
but
we're going to do it so that people can hold if they want to and make amendments or that sort of thing. Motion B, the increases will be by department.
And it's and there's just
Motion
one,
C is just one department.
and motion B is also just one department.
Okay, got it. Makes sense to me.
Is the department for motion B?
The school department.
Oh, okay. I see also. Okay.
So I try to get rid of the vernacular, but 301 is the department code and
Right.
the mass
301 's.
accounting system that we use. So it will just be for, line item 1000-301- whatever the object code is. And we won't read the whole budget again. We'll just say the thing that we just passed, hopefully, plus this amount.
It's funny, every single town uses 300 for schools for some reason.
Yeah, so it's called UMass, Unified Massachusetts Accounting System. And so select boards are all 122, DPWs are all 420, parks and rec are all 630 and 650, libraries are all 610.
Mr. Hummel.
Hello, Carl Hummel, 15 Misco Road. I'm also on the Finance Committee. One of the questions I've been asked that I wanted to share with the meeting is, have we squeezed the fat out of the budget? Have we asked the school committee to do what they could? And I'd like to say that yes, that has been done. When we first started reviewing the hybrid proposal, we went back to the school committee and said, can you bring down your ask? And they did so. Jeremy went through the town budget and looked at the different departments. And on Monday night, we looked at some of the proposals and we said, no, we're not going to fund some of the, we're not going to request in the budget some of the things that the department heads asked for last November. So we have practiced that level of fiscal scrutiny. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, I think the few $100,000 drop from the initial budget. I don't remember what our drop was. That was also in the couple $100,000 range, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it didn't get to 200,000. I think we're probably in the 160, 140, something like that.
Right. So that's, $400,000 almost between the two of us. That's a lot of services
And then,
to not offer.
some small things too, like we moved the lifeguards to the Parks Revolving Fund because we moved the revenue there. The general fund had been previously subsidizing the town beach operations, and now it's fee based on the revolving fund. So even small things like that on the corners.
All right. Anything else?
Can I,
Yes, sir.
as a moderator,
going.
state something for the record? So after talking with the town administrator and the town clerk, there have been so many info sessions and meetings and, dedicated conversations about this town meeting warrant that my decision was that the people in Mendon are more prepared for this town meeting than they've ever been prepared for a town meeting in existence. And so we're actually dispensing with our normal ATM walkthrough because I feel like just having another meeting ahead of the meeting is,
That makes sense.
I would argue that this meeting is not just about the warrant. This is about the budget, and it's also importantly about the ballot question, because
Right.
importantly, ballots have already been mailed out. There are already people voting, people who are voting by mail. People may have already returned their ballots.
Yeah, that's possible.
So this is, I think it's important that we have as much information as possible as early and often. But I guess I do wonder about we weren't going over the whole warrant tonight. So I don't know if.
But
just
it's been
putting it out
reviewed.
there.
well, but there's been other info sessions about other warrant articles. It's my feeling.
Monday's finance session.
There's Monday's finance session. There's
I'm writing my warrant report, which will be available Monday.
right. There was also an info session about the subject raised by the citizens petition, among other subjects.
Hey, you can say Providence Culvert. It's
Yeah,
not-
Providence Culvert.
It's
I feel like it's saying Bloody Mary in the mirror.
okay, go ahead.
But we've had so many meetings about this meeting in various ways. I think that just this time around, dispensing with the normal warrant walkthrough is warranted.
I guess, well, so should people have questions about some of the other items? What's the process? Because I know Ann Mazar has asked me when we're going over the full warrant or like CPA questions. So, and I said that I believed it was not tonight because we don't have it on the agenda to go over the warrant.
I'm a big believer more is better than less, because I don't think many of these warrant articles have been exposed outside of the mailing. I mean, unfortunately, Mr. Marty, you have created expectation that there will be a warrant walkthrough through Zoom. And some people might be waiting for that. So to not do it now, because we've been very targeted with budget culvert by design. But a lot of the CPC articles, people can see for the first
And
time.
the assessors have an article
Yep.
as well.
I mean, I did ask that Tuesday be used as the possible date if I'm hearing from the board that they would like a warrant walkthrough.
I'm saying that I've had questions about the warrant come up that weren't ones that we
Yeah,
have read
so
specifically as a.
I can extend also the budget website to do FAQs for the warrant. That's really not a huge deal. But I'm hearing you all. So, yeah, I mean,
They historically have had low attendance, which I think was part of the discussion too. Like there's the folks who are there are the folks talking about them, not necessarily folks asking questions about them.
Well, what are the views on these things over time? While you're looking that up, I'm gonna let Mr. Krager talk. Go ahead, Mike. What do you think?
Can I recommend that we just do a warrant article walkthrough for things minus the topics that have already had significant discussion? You know, the CPC articles, the Finance Committee did vote to not recommend one of the articles. So there could be contentious subjects, and at least we have a recorded meeting that goes through, you know, the assessors, the CPC articles, you know, a few of the other ones that people should be aware of and probably haven't been walked through in such detail. So maybe it's a shortened version instead of going through the budget, typically the culvert one. You know, it focuses on CPC and assessors.
I just to be clear, I suggested Tuesday as our day for the walkthrough. It sounds like talking to the board, it's one of the reasons I brought this up here, was to see how people were feeling about it. The point of the walkthrough isn't, just to be clear, isn't to provide another space to litigate these issues as for town meeting floor. The point of this, just to be clear, is to discuss the mechanics of the articles themselves, what they're going to do to make sure people know what they're voting on. If people want to advocate for or against something, yeah, so you mentioned things being contentious. That's the point of that, is town meeting floor and discussions amongst the town people ahead of town meeting as well.
So I think if we could get, so I just saw the views are pretty low. They're around in the 40s, but that's 1/3 of town meeting. So that would be 1/3 of the people missing out on the information that they're come to see. So I think minus the financial stuff, and then I can take that information that gets talked through there, because Ann wasn't able to attend the finance meeting. So I could take that information and turn that into web content as well. And so that would help.
So I can, so we can look forward to Tuesday at 6:30 p.m.
Okay.
for the town meeting walkthrough.
Thank you.
That'll be like 45
still be
minutes to an
recorded,
hour.
right?
It will still be recorded. Any relevant department that can make it, please make it. If not, I'm happy to talk over the information with you, make sure I'm conveying things correctly. Obviously, welcome to the entirety of the public, just to make sure everybody, you know, these other articles are getting their time in the sun as well.
Because we have 34.
34.
So, yeah, the CPC ones, CPA funds, those being distributed are often complicated and often do require some explanation. So that point was driven home on Monday night's meeting. I heard that over and over again. So I think you guys are right there. All right. So that essentially is our meeting for tonight. And yes.
I want to be the person who extends the meeting, but
You go ahead.
But Maureen Cohen, can you hear me from here? Maureen Cohen, Superintendent. I just want to thank the boards and members, representatives for the collaborative relationship we've had throughout this whole process. We've been meeting, for those that don't know, we start our budget process early in the fall, have budget subcommittees with representatives that have been attending, had a great multi-board discussion, you know, in the mid-year point. And thank you for sharing all of our resources with the community. I just want to point out that we have lots and lots of presentations on our own budget website. And
We have linked your budget website from our websites.
just added, because we just offered 2 budget info sessions ourselves last 2 days. I put up, it's a shortened version. It's about 25 minutes of a presentation, and it's right on our budget website. So if someone has not seen our presentation, it's kind of the highlights, and then there's lots of additional information there. So if people have further questions that haven't been asked, we're more than happy to direct you to the resources, beyond the meetings that we've been having. But again, thank you for all of those opportunities and working together.
No, thank you guys. You guys have been awesome. And the multi-board meeting, I think, is a great kind of new add to this situation. And I would, as these boards change, you guys don't change as much as these boards do. I would love to see that continue. I think that has been very useful from this board's perspective. So. Alrighty, select board, any closing notes? All right, so we have 3 upcoming meetings. We have May 6th, which is our regular select board meeting. That's next Wednesday. We'll be finalizing that meeting agenda on Monday afternoon. May 12th is the annual town meeting at Misco Middle School. And are we doing that in the gymnasium? Yes. And we're doing that in the gymnasium. And then May 20th, 2026, that'll take place. That's a regular meeting that takes place after town elections. And so there'll be a slightly different board as there are 2 positions up for election. Also we will handle the board's reorganization at that point in time as well. Anything else anybody wants to put on future agendas? All right, then I would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor, Cooter, aye?
Who goes on?
Oh, yeah.
Chanel, I.
All right, meeting adjourned. Have a great night at
Have a good night.
7:31.
Thank you for coming.